Hey guys, welcome to my video. So today I'm just going to be reading a couple stories from the TrueScaryStories subreddit. All the credit for the posters I'll leave in the description. It's also in the post itself. Hope you guys enjoy. Please like and subscribe. My wife stepped on something in the lake. The next day, they found a body. A few years ago, when my daughter was a toddler, my wife and I used to take her to a nearby lake to picnic, swim, and just unwind. It was a peaceful spot, quiet, not too crowded, the kind of place where you could just easily forget about the world for a while. One afternoon, after we'd finished eating, my wife decided to go for a quick swim while I stayed on the beach with our daughter. I watched her wade out into the water, the sun sparkling off the surface. A minute later, she suddenly stopped and turned to me, shouting something. At first, I couldn't make out what she said, but her expression was off. Then I heard her clearly. I think I just stepped on someone's face. I froze for a second, thinking maybe she was joking, but the look on her face wasn't playful. It was pale, almost terrified. She quickly started making her way back to the shore, her legs moving faster, like she couldn't get out of the water fast enough. When she got back to me, she was visibly shaken. She said that while she was swimming, her foot brushed against something soft, and at first, she thought it was a rock or a weird patch of seaweed, but when she pressed her foot down, she felt the unmistakable shape of a face beneath the water, a nose, an eye socket. She swore she felt the hollow of the eye. I considered going in to check it out, but something stopped me. The unease in my gut, maybe. We decided to pack up and leave right after that. The next day, the local news reported that a young boy who had been missing for a few days was found drowned in that same lake, not far from where we had been. He'd been there the whole time, just beneath the surface. To this day, my wife is convinced she stepped on his face. Came across an incredibly creepy family a while back. Okay, I never really post anything on Reddit, mostly just reading, so please excuse me if I do or say anything that isn't common courtesy here. In around 2018 or 2019, 25 female at the time, I was 18 or 19, and I was living in Nebraska, where I grew up. I lived in the largest city in New England, but it was still essentially surrounded by corn and wheat fields. The city was expanding, so rich folks started building huge houses with giant properties on the edge of town as things proceeded to grow. All of that being said, I had a good friend whose parents' house was one of the big ones right on the blurring line between the fields and the city. My friends and I were constantly hanging out at his place because it was fun. They had tons of property to ride 4x4s on, a hot tub, a huge living room for us to watch sports and have reality TV binge sessions, etc. Plus, his parents were super cool, and we could drink out there as long as we stayed at the house. It was tons of fun, even though I was/am quite scared of the dark. So I would just not go outside after a certain time because there was little lighting and the nearest neighbor was about a mile away. I always felt a weird energy driving to/from his place if it was late at night, but never had anything happen until one night. The drive out there was a long winding two-way road that had these thick trees on both sides, and you passed one of the city's largest cemeteries on the way. Barely any lighting, of course. Besides the street lamps every once in a while and very little traffic. It's all inherently a bit creepy, and I'll admit to having sped through this section of the road many times to get through it as quickly as possible. This specific night was perfect spring weather, so I was driving with my windows down listening to music, and it was around 10 p.m. I was coming around one of the curves in the road when I had to essentially slam my brakes on. Right in front of me in the middle of the road, maybe 50 yards, was what looked like the family. Again, picture a completely pitch black road, thick forest on both sides, and only my headlights to show what's in front of me. This was a family of 4, a tall, slim woman, an average height/weight man, a child, short hair but couldn't tell the gender based on the clothing, and I couldn't see their face, maybe around 8 years old, and the mother was pushing a fucking stroller. Their clothes looked normal, not tattered but not nice. They were also not carrying any kind of light source, meaning before I arrived behind them in my car, they'd been walking the pitch black. They were all facing away from me, walking completely silent in the middle of the street, the same direction I was heading. I had turned down my music to hear if they were speaking. I had music playing before, etc. They didn't. The hairs on my arm immediately stood up. I came to a stop in the road behind them, obviously, and just sat there for a moment to let them move. They seemed to be completely unaffected by me and didn't even turn their heads slightly, nor did they attempt to move out of my way. I literally thought I was going insane, or that I was dreaming. It was so surreal. Before I really had time to fully process and register what I was seeing and how truly strange it was, they all, at the same time, stopped walking and very slowly turned to face my car. This scared the absolute shit out of me. I honestly didn't even give myself enough time to look at their faces as they turned. I immediately threw my car in reverse and sent it backwards for a full 20 seconds before flipping a U-turn. Nearly turning, running myself off the road, and booking it the other direction. The only thing I remember noticing is that the stroller looked to be completely empty. This was the part that sticks in my mind the most. I've never felt terror like that in my life. I checked the rearview mirror probably 1,000 times before getting to the main road and never saw a glimpse of them. In fact, I never saw a glimpse of them ever again. I tried asking my friend and his family about it, only to essentially feel like I was insane because of the way they looked at me. Every time I tell the story, I get one of 3 reactions. They immediately think I'm fucking cuckoo, think I'm lying, or have had something sort of similar happen to them. I really don't care if no one believes me, honestly. It was, and still is, the creepiest thing to ever happen to me. I think about it all the time. It was either some weird-ass family trying to scare the shit out of someone, a distraction for an attempted robbery / assault / etc., or it was something more sinister. I'm going to tell myself for probably the rest of my life that it was the first option. I watched my coworker get arrested and then found out he had a sinister plan for me. I worked with this man for a little over 3 years. We worked pretty closely on some projects over the last 2 years and even sat near one another at work. In September, I showed up and saw about 10 detectives at my place of work. I was a bit startled as this was quite unusual for my area. I looked around and saw that my coworker was in handcuffs and looked quite disheveled, which wasn't out of the norm to be honest. I walked up to the detectives, introduced myself, and let them know who I was in relation to him. I asked what was going on and they filled me in on why he was currently being arrested. For the sake of the case, I won't share more than he was a disgusting person. Over the course of the next 3 hours, I watched as they dismantled his workstation, went through his belongings, took evidence pictures, and so on. I was pulled in and out of rooms answering questions about his character, what I knew of him, and my feelings about him as a person. I told them he gave me a weird feeling in my gut that I've always told my husband I wouldn't be surprised if the cops ever did come looking for him, that my husband even thought he was weird, and if I ever went missing that he'd be the first person to be suspected. Didn't realize how real this almost was. The detective on site told me that they served the search warrant at his home and were looking for any evidence. It sounded like they found more than they anticipated and were looking to see if there was anything else unrelated to what they were currently investigating. I was asked my name and my husband's name for confirmation for something they found, which I did think was odd, but I let it go and called my husband to update him on the happenings of the day thus far. However, the last hour I was pulled in for the final time and advised by one of the lead detectives, who couldn't even look at me, that I needed to ensure I was safe and protected in the event they didn't book him that day. Come to find out, he had been journaling about me over the course of at least a year, saying he wanted to be with me, but the problem was that I was married. His journal then lined out a plan to set my husband up for cheating on me, and the end resulted in my death, caused by him, my coworker. The officer said that everything in between was more vile than he's ever heard, to the point he was crying when he was telling me to make sure I was safe. Crying, a detective, and didn't want to scare me. Thankfully, he was charged, and looking at a long time in prison, but I still think about it. It keeps me up at night. Just shows you never really know someone, even your coworkers. Camping incident last year. So me and my best friend try to go camping once a year. We've been doing this since we were 13 years old. Never really been truly scared or had anything weird happen until last year in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We showed up during peak season, the first night, and space was very limited. We were losing light, so we set up camp on a spot on the side of the mountain that was an absolute wind tunnel. Morning came, so we went into town, drank beers, and dicked around until late afternoon. By the time we got back up to the mountain to switch our camping spot, we were losing light again, but managed to find a more remote spot. We got set up with our tents, got the fire going, and started drinking again. Time goes by, it's probably 1 a.m. when we see a flashlight aimed at us, and then it starts walking our way. We don't really think much of it, and assume it's likely a park ranger coming to fuss at us about something, because who else walks up on you in a remote part of the mountains at 1 a.m.? I don't know about you, but ever since I started camping, I learned it's kind of an unspoken rule that you don't walk up on someone camping that late at night unless it's an emergency. Anyways, the person gets close enough, and we realize it's just some guy, probably early 50s, in a shirt and basketball shorts, and his girl in her 40s who's avoiding eye contact with us. The man immediately forces a conversation about nothing, doesn't acknowledge the time or his girl. His eyes were darting all over the place while we were talking to him about dumb shit like what model or style of lantern we had and how cool it was. He's saying weird stuff like how he used to be a former law enforcement, completely out of context of the random conversation he engaged us in, when all of a sudden he pretends to land his flashlight on our tents and says, "Oh, that's where you guys are sleeping, huh? Cool setup." The way his eyes and flashlight are moving gives both of us the feeling that he's trying to see how many of us there were, and what we had on near us, because his eyes and flashlight kept scanning the ground around us. We were getting sized up. For what? I don't know. Once this guy sees everything around us, he kind of pauses for a minute, ends the conversation, and walks off into the woods. Once his flashlight disappears, me and my friend look at each other, and without saying anything, he looks at me and says, "We're packing our shit and getting out of here." So we did. This was the most unsettling thing I have ever had happen while camping. I think this guy was going to wait until we were asleep and come back. I just don't know what for what. But I do know we were 100% getting sized up that night. Might not seem like much, but if you have ever had a moment with another human being who is sizing you up, you'll know what I'm talking about.